Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Lucha Underground Luchador Spotlight. Last week we covered El Mejor Luchador, Jack Evans, the high-flying, crazy, beatboxing, crazy dancing son of a gun that thinks he's the best luchador, even though he's a white boy from the U.S. But today we're talking about somebody that only fits the white description of everything I just said. Not from the U.S., doesn't really think that he's the best luchador because I don't think he even claims to be a luchador. Angelico from South Africa.
Angelico, probably one of the most exciting prospects to really watch grow and come into his own in season one. I mean, here is a guy that really had one of the defining moments of the first season, which what he calls the crossbody.
Yep.
And I'm telling you, I can only see his stock climbing higher. In fact, you could even say that it might soar, pun completely intended, in season two. And I'm just really excited to dissect his first season and really talk about his future here today.
Yeah, it's really crazy to think about how many people in season one have that sort of top star potential.
Yes,
Because we've
yes.
already talked about guys like Johnny Mundo and Drago, and I mean already obviously Jack Evans. I think he's a definite guy in that category, and Son of Havoc is another big one. I think Angelico falls in that category as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think Angelico's a guy, and see, I say this, but Lucha Underground's definitely earned my trust and my confidence. With any wrestling company, when you have a guy like Angelico, all that's really needed is to give him the time and attention. The right stories, the right investment, and I trust Lucha Underground completely to do that. So I think the second season is going to be very kind to Angelico, and he just looks to me like a guy that'll take the ball and really run with it and just grow to be that guy. Because I think he's got a great look physically. He's insane in the ring and he's got charisma as well. So he really does have all the tools to make it. It just comes down to, being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what it really comes down to for him is that he's got all the tools to be a massive star in the U.S. wrestling scene. Even I mean, I'm not trying to just kind of pigeonhole him to, well, he only can get big if he works in AAA, or he can only get big if he works in his home country, South Africa. No, I think he has what it takes to become a top star pretty much anywhere, including the U.S.
Oh, completely agree with you. I mean, look, times have changed. 2015, performers like Angelico are what really hit the palate right of the wrestling fan, I think. I really do believe he's in the right place at the right time in terms of being a professional wrestler, and I feel like he is going to do so well in season two.
Absolutely. So let's get to talking about his first season. And I think it's worth noting that, I mean, his debut was alongside Arhenis, Aerostar, and Brian Cage, or just Cage if we're only talking about Lucha. And he immediately stood out to me personally.
Right,
And I
yeah.
remember that night we even had a discussion where I was just praising, just heaping praise on this guy, talking about how he has a great look and he's really good in the ring, and he just, like, I immediately saw something in him and thought that there was even a little bit of like a Dean Ambrose to some of his body movement and body language rather, and that kind of thing, and it stuck with me. I've been such a fan of his, and for the longest time I really do feel like he is probably my personal, like, I don't want to say favorite, but kind of like my guy. That guy where, like, I feel like everyone kind of overlooks just how good he is compared to my view of him.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember that discussion, and especially the Dean Ambrose comparison that you kind of likened to him early on. That is very distinct to me, in my mind. And yeah, like you were the guy that was just really like, I think Angelico could really go somewhere. I thought he could just be like another reliable, like high flying hand, like, oh, you want Lucha, I've got Lucha for you, and then you send a guy out like Angelico to do all the crazy stuff. But he's really proven in this first season and just the stories he's been given to be so much more than that. He's got a depth to him, which I think will only aid him in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as where he actually went from there, there was the whole feud with Son of Havoc and Ivelisses, where he just kind of traded wins with them. I know he beat Son of Havoc first, and then Ivelisses beat him with Son of Havoc's help, and then he beat Ivelisses when Son of Havoc was the referee, and that just a bunch of different matches, and it ended up kind of culminating in them being forced to team up in the trios tournament.
Exactly. It's a classic case of, none of these people like each other, but we're going to force cohesion, through this tournament. And, what resulted was absolutely wonderful. But yeah, the road to getting there, I think, was just absolutely amazing. So
Yeah,
no complaints
absolutely.
here.
Yeah, so once they started teaming up, though, was when things got really interesting for them because they didn't really gel at first. And then there was one point, I think their first match as a team in this tournament, where Ivelisses wanted to leave and she was walking up the steps, and Angelico got taken out, and Son of Havoc pretty much by himself won them a match.
Yes, much to the shock of Ivelisses, she couldn't believe it because she was really looking to stick it to Havoc for having dumped her. I believe it was like what, like a few weeks prior, and she was like, "Well, this is how I'm gonna get my revenge." And then seeing Son of Havoc pull it off when Angelico was just laid out, just really left her stupefied. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, and so then they obviously went on to win the tournament, but even though they won the tournament, that wasn't the last match that they had in order to actually win the trios titles, because let's not forget, Cueto comes out and drops the crew on their heads.
Yes, yes, the crew emerges, which I thought was a stroke of genius. Because if you remember, talking about discussions and everything, I think I said on episode 12 when the tournament was getting, close to fruition, that I was just really surprised that the crew were not entrants in this thing, since they were the kind of the original trios team. You know what I mean? And then you kind of see them sprung on them, and it's like, clever, clever. So I really like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, and obviously the unfortunate, really the worst part I think of season one was the fact that Evilise got injured midway through the season.
Yes.
But I mean, the great thing about it is that they used that injury to really feed into storyline, because then I don't think it was the following week, but at one point we had Angelico and Son of Havoc versus Cisco and Cortez Castro, and they ended up losing that match because it was just 2-on-2, and Cisco and Castro had more chemistry. They knew each other well, whereas with Havoc and Angelico, they were more kind of like trying to show off, trying to prove who could outdo the other, and they ended up getting caught, and that led to Cueto making them defend the titles the following week in a ladder match, which of course then Ivelisse was at a significant disadvantage.
Yeah, this is really where the brilliance of Lucha Underground shine through, because with Ivelisse having this handicap, they used it to, to your point, as a storytelling element, and I think that works so brilliantly, especially given that this team does not like each other. We called them Team Sitcom because of their consistent miscommunications. So yeah, this is a great way to kind of accentuate the positives and hide the negatives, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And really the most notable parts of these two matches that they had against the crew was on Helico, because in the first one he had, like you said, the crossbody, but in the second one he had what I've dubbed the ICBM dropkick, because I mean, coming off the top rope, it's a missile dropkick, but when you come from the top of Cueto's office, it's an intercontinental ballistic missile dropkick.
Yes. Yes, and that's just it. On Helico, in one season alone, it really had two defining moments. The crossbody and the ICBM dropkick from the office to one of the crew members that was still on the ladder, which I thought that was really impressive, the precision of it all. And yeah, and Helico just showed what an insane athlete he actually is. So I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, I thought the crossbody was the better moment because we hadn't seen it happen yet with him, and it was just
Right.
amazing because it seemed like he came out of nowhere. But I feel like the drop kick was the more impressive feat because he didn't really have anyone to break his fall.
Exactly. Yeah, I was more impressed by the drop kick because again, he actually hit his target for one, and it's got to be more painful coming down than a crossbody, because
Yeah,
your opponent's only feeling like your feet, whereas the rest of your body is hitting that canvas. Whereas with the crossbody, it's like, well, your opponent's making full contact with you.
yeah.
So yeah, definitely more impressed by the drop kick. Though I agree with you, I feel like the crossbody is going to have greater longevity because it was the initial move. You know what I mean? It was like
Yeah.
the initial big pop. So yeah.
So really, after that, they didn't do much. I know they had the one defense against Cage, Big Rick, and Davari, but they ended up winning that with the help of Tejano. I don't think they had any other title defenses in between the the ladder match and Ultima Lucha other than that one. Am I right?
I believe you are correct. Yes.
Yeah, and then obviously the Disciples of Death and Katrina, and then the whole kind of death crew there took up an interest in the team that Angelico was on with Havoc and Ivelisses. So they ended up in just a series of backstage segments where, in one of them you had them all three training, and then the Disciples of Death show up and knock them out. In another one, you had Katrina show up and talk trash to Son of Havoc, and then Ivelisses goes to throw a punch at her. She disappears, and Ivelisses lands on Son of Havoc, and then Angelico walks in, and everything's awkward. And, just a bunch of different stuff like that, all culminating in the 3-on-3 match for the Trios titles at Ultima Lucha Part 1 between Team Havoc and the Disciples of Death. Of course, the DOD win thanks to Katrina hitting Ivelisses in the head with the rock that Mil Muertes carries around. And sadly, that is the last that we saw of any of these people. All we know is that Angelico left on his own bike, and then Son of Havoc left with Ivelisses on a separate bike. That's all we know.
Yes. So, with that in mind, we look to season 2. I think you and I have already kind of talked about, a little bit at least, because I believe we already covered Son of Havoc, if I'm not mistaken, in a prior
Yes, we
episode.
did.
And we already kind of talked about how they would get their rematch early in the season, because Son of Havoc did say to Angelico, we'll get those belts back. And then, as you said, went with Ivelisses on a separate bike. So, yeah, I mean, you guys already kind of know from the Johnny Mundo episode what I would have for Angelico, have him get his rematch for the Trios title out of the way early. Then I'd have him go on a singles tear, which ultimately sees him crossing paths with Mundo. Just the whole idea being, hey, kid, I've seen, the crossbody. I've seen the ICBM dropkick. I used to do that kind of stuff too, and it got me nowhere. You might want to think about it. And then Angelico, of course, being cocky and arrogant, maybe like, well, maybe it didn't get you anywhere because you're nowhere near as good as I am, and you do that whole story. Right. So yeah, I'm sticking by Angelico versus Johnny Mundo, because to me, and then I'm going to hand the ball over to you. Like, he's already won the Trios titles. I want him to work out his business. Could he still work in that division? Absolutely. But I see so much potential in him in singles. I want to mine it now. And I feel like Mundo's in a place. He already sent Patron out the door, which makes me smile every time I say it. And, I want to see him really build that new talent. So I think seeing him and Angelico at an Ultima Lucha where Angelico gets the win, I mean, already you're going to be kind of looking towards Angelico to be a world title contender, if not the champion, by season 3. I'm trying to build it brick by brick, and I really just want to get the development of Angelico underway. So that's my whole plan. What about you?
Yeah, well, I think that we already have a general idea of how my season would go for Angelico. I would start him out, obviously, with Son of Havoc and Ivelisses, having them go back after the titles. They would not get them. But then I would have him, because your whole thing is you want Angelico Mundo at Ultima Lucha, and we've already talked about this a few times. I want Angelico Mundo to happen earlier on in the season. Like, I could see that match, not even the match, but the feud as a whole culminating before episode 20.
Right.
But I personally would have Mundo win the feud.
Right.
I would have Angelico just, they would put on amazing matches, and there's no doubt in my mind about that. But I would have Mundo win the feud, and it would be a launching pad for him to get back into the world title picture.
Right. And you know what? It's funny to me, Ashton, because when we looked in the comments, at least from what I recollect, on the Johnny Mundo episode, a lot of people echoed your sentiments, which, don't get me wrong, as the ultimate Johnny Mundo mark, you have no idea how happy that made me, that people are like, no, we're going to keep him in the world title picture. We may even put the belt on him, do all that. I wouldn't mind that. I just feel like when you say feud, it implies more than one match. I feel like at least if Angelico beats Mundo one time,
right,
even if it's like that kind of hiccup win, that does get in people's minds like, oh shit, he beat Johnny Mundo.
yes.
Like, I'm really looking to give Angelico that moment. That's my thing. It's just I want to kind of multiply it by 10, because it's at Ultima Lucha, it's the big stage, it's everything. So
yeah, I would have him win one match against him.
Right.
Out of 3, I would have them do 3 matches. Angelico would win one of them. But then what I would do is I would have Angelico coming fresh off of a loss to Mundo meet up with Jack Evans coming fresh off of a loss to Phoenix for the Gift of the Gods title, and just
Right.
kind of have them both a little bit down in the dumps, being like, man, I did have some success in the trios division, but now it looks like Havoc and Ivelisses are doing their own things. Do you want to try and find a third, somebody else for us to team up with, and make a run at the titles, make a run at the Disciples of Death? And I already explained this in my Jack Evans booking for next season, but I would have them go on a series of tag team matches against other people. I mentioned one team where it would be Mascarita Sagrada and Pimpinella Escarlata. I would have them go against the team of Son of Havoc and Ivelisses just to make things super awkward for everyone. And then in the end, I would have the kind of the final team that they face be PJ Black and a jobber, insert name here, whether it's Mariachi Loco or Famous B or Vinny Massaro, whoever. And PJ Black just carries whoever his partner is through the match. Literally at one point, even like we talked about this, have Jack Evans pull out the drunken kung fu and just embarrass this partner of PJ Black's, and have PJ get in the ring, kick Jack Evans to the point that he's like incapacitated for a moment, drag his partner over to their corner, get back on the outside, grab the tag rope, and make the tag in for himself to get back into the match. And even though I would have Angelico and Jack Evans win the match, I wouldn't have them pin PJ Black, and I would have them be incredibly impressed by him and want to recruit him. So then they become a trio, go after the trio's titles, and win them at Ultima Lucha.
I will say what I really love about your fantasy booking, and I kind of touched on this in the Jack Evans episode. First of all, the thought that went into it all. I mean, that goes without saying. But I think when you really look at it more and you weigh it more on its own merits, I do like that it does seem to give both Jack Evans and Angelico a breather. Like, okay, we tried our hand at singles. We had some success, some losses. Let's regroup. Let's restabilize. Because then I would feel like, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like then when they would get done this trio's run, then you could really push them in singles that time around and really make the stars out of them that they can be.
Yeah, I would say after that trio's run, I would honestly, if it makes sense for the story, I would probably try to get the world title on one of them and the Gift of the Gods title on the other, and maybe tease a feud between them after that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I'd be totally down for that. Absolutely. So, yeah, I really have nothing to add because I already loved your fantasy booking from the Jack Evans episode, and that pretty much carries over to here. You
it would
already
be
knew
interesting if like Son of Havoc ended up being the one to take the title off of Mill, and then Angelico challenged him for the title.
That would be interesting. Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's some possibility.
There's a lot that could happen. And it's funny because we say like, oh, well, that guy's not a main eventer, or that guy's upper mid card at best or whatever. But I feel like there's no glass ceiling for most of these guys that we're talking about.
Well, that's what's so exhilarating about this show, right? And like I know the focus is on Angelico, so I don't want to like, runaway train here. But like I am licking my chops for January because I was directed towards a Thanksgiving message, which by the way, I hope everybody
from Johnny Mundo.
From Johnny Mundo. And he called out Mil Muertes. And he said, Mil Muertes is world champion. I think he said something about Cage getting his GED. He's going to be a successor of that. Cage getting his GED. And so, like Mundo doesn't fear Muertes. And I'm like, oh, are they actually?
He also mentioned in that video that he hasn't seen Cueto since Ultima Lucha.
That's right. That's right. So, you think, oh, is he going to gun for Muertes? How is that going to work out? I love how he pointed out how he just sent Alberto Patron out of the building.
Yes. He was so matter of fact about it too. Like it wasn't even a big deal to him. He was just like, "Yeah, I did that. Whatever."
And again, like I don't bring this up. Okay, well, I partially brought it up so I could gush, but my point is that like it makes me like my chops for January because you think like who's gonna feud with who, and that's I think ties into your point, Ashton, about there not really being a glass ceiling because the idea of say Angelico feuding with a Johnny Mundo or finding two new partners isn't absurd because there's such fluidity for most of these guys. I mean, hell, honestly, some of the most intriguing episodes of this series, I don't want to speak for our audience here, but I would have to presume will be when we talk about the guys like the Mariachi Locos and Famous Bees and stuff like that because anybody can be a star in Lucha Underground on any given night.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the second season so exciting because it's like whose stock is going to rise, whose stock is going to fall, who's going to mingle with who. And I just can't wait for us to get here, man. I really can't. Like knowing that we're this close to December and then just one more month after that, I'm itching for it, man. I'm itching for it.
Yeah, you know what I think is really exciting too is that it really does sort of feel like, with it starting in January and, it's the new year and it's a new season, it feels like a fresh start. But at that same time, I legitimately think that Lucha Underground is going to go the route of, even though the cameras haven't been on, this universe still exists while the television isn't being played.
I know, right? I love that.
I think
Yeah.
that's so interesting. Like that just kind of blows my mind.
Well, I think it's such an intelligent use of social media, right? Because when
Yeah.
you've got like the Lucha Underground Facebook saying, "Oh, well, look at this new office door," or "Oh, look at this message from Johnny Mundo," it establishes a sense of continuity even though they're off season. And I love that because it shows it's not that difficult to do. And again, like I hate to make it seem like every episode there's always got to be some pot shot at WWE somewhere, but this just shows you that there's no excuse why off season can't work with today's capabilities and the means that we have to get media out to certain people or certain wide groups of people.
Yeah.
WWE feels the need to have a television show every week of the year. Lucha Underground's like, nah, it's no big thing. We can take off and we can have a guy shoot an interview here and talk about the second season. We could put out a teaser here. It's not that hard. And to me, I'm more excited about that than just waiting the next week for a Monday Night Raw because there's no anticipation. There's really nothing to anticipate. Whereas with Lucha Underground, I mean, dude, how long have you and I been jonesing for our fix now? Come on.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And it's cool too because like I feel like Angelico is no more or less main event material than say like a Prince Puma.
Agree, completely agree.
Yeah, and I
Exactly.
love that too because like it really does kind of remind me just like the vibe that I get from Lucha Underground. It almost reminds me. I don't know if you guys are at all familiar. I plug it every now and then. So if you are an avid listener of Twitwell, you probably have at least heard of it. PodSwaggle is another podcast that I absolutely love. It's literally the only wrestling podcast that I listen to anymore because all of the former wrestlers that do podcasts are either freaking being paid by WWE not to say bad shit about them, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, way overly obnoxiously cynical and just hate everything. And I can't handle that kind of stuff. So Podswoggle, I feel, is right in the middle. And they have a series that they used to do. They haven't done one in probably over a year, called the Total Repackage, where they would just throw a name out, and the one dude would come up with a brand new gimmick and a brand new kind of look and just kind of repackage them to make them relevant. And the whole point of it is like, I want to make money with this character. How do you make money with this character? And we think about like your famous B and your Vinny Massaro and that kind of like the guys that we call jobbers now. And it's almost a little bit like NXT too, because like Aiden English was a jobber at one point and then he got the singing gimmick and now he's in a popular tag team. They would take like JTG and they would completely repackage him where like he was on drugs that whole time, but now he's clean and he's actually like a super smart college educated guy, and they renamed him to Jason Theodore Greenspan. So his initials are still JTG, but like now he's got like this obnoxious like almost like Damian Sandow gimmick where he's smarter than everyone else, but it's progressive because it's the WWE actually portraying a black dude as intelligent. How, go figure, right?
I freaking love that, actually. I'm sorry. I know you were talking there, but I'm like, Theodore Greenspan. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? Like it's
Shove that
really
PG
cool.
up her ass.
Yeah, they have 4 episodes of this out, and I think that they do 3 people an episode. So they've repackaged 12 different people, and there are only like maybe 1 or 2 that I can think like I remember not liking out of the 12. So like it just reminds me of that because when creative minds are given an opportunity to express themselves, great things can happen. And the guys in Lucha Underground that are writing the show, I think that there are probably some really good creative minds that are writing for WWE right now, but they're so repressed and they're so just
Constrained.
handcuffed. Yeah. And it's like we're getting to see what actual creative minds that aren't handcuffed by a corporate machine are able to do when just given the opportunity to write a story that they want to write.
And Ashley, this is something that I've got to say before we go off the air tonight, because of this whole conversation we're having. You think about what Mick Foley wrote recently on Facebook about like how he's so tired of getting behind certain guys or being excited about certain NXT prospects getting what he put in like chokehold air quotes called up or that promotion, only to see them get treated like crap or to fail just by writing standards. With me, the best part if you're a wrestling fan about Lucha Underground is you really feel like you get a return on your investment. Because to me, and this isn't going to make any sense, maybe it will, but I feel like Lucha Underground walks that balance perfectly of clearly establishing a hierarchy, but just really making it seem like it doesn't even exist because anybody can get anywhere at any time. Like, I could see this season Angelico taking a guy like Mil Muertes to the limit. And
Yeah.
that's just how Lucha Underground operates. And I love it because, and
Well, I
especially
mean,
for a,
really, look no further than the best of 5 series that we got between Drago and Aerostar. Because really, before that, if you would have asked me, I would have said Drago's up here, Aerostar's down here. This is going to be a sweep. And they made Aerostar look extremely legit. And after that feud, I not only did I really enjoy Aerostar as a worker, but I had a little bit more of like respect for the character as far as prestige goes. Like I saw him as higher on the card than I did before the feud.
And that's just it. Like the way they're able to elevate people, and coming from a guy whose favorite wrestler ever is in this promotion when he was in WWE, like I had no hope of him being the guy or holding that world title. I have that hope every season now because you never know what's going to happen, and that's what I love. It's that pure bewilderment and innocence of the wrestling fan of getting behind a person or a character and wanting to see what they can do and never really feeling disappointed, even if they don't necessarily hit the mark that you'd want them to, because sometimes it's just not going to happen. You never walk away bitter, though, because they weren't wasted. They
Right.
weren't constrained or handcuffed, and that's what I freaking love about this show, man. Because even if you're like, I'll give a perfect example too. If you are, and I don't even say this jokingly, if you are a famous B fan, maybe you saw something in him. You had to be impressed with his performance in that battle royal for the last Aztec medallion.
Yes.
And you have to be thinking with something like that, man, could they actually have maybe one office scene, with him, or like one little backstage scene? He confronts somebody, he stands up for himself, and that's the beginning of something new, because it can happen. Anywhere else you could say that, and you'd be laughed out of the room, and you'd think, oh, that's a joke, get that fantasy booking, get that crack pipe out of here. But here, it's possible. And for a guy that's usually so cynical, it's nice to have this optimism that's just bursting out of me because I know what this show can be, and they know it. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of talking about a guy like Angelico, because I don't feel like these words are wasted. They're not, because it can happen. And I think that's the first step for any genuine excitement. And God, I can't wait for the second season.
It's going to be amazing, dude.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. I think we've exhausted everything that we've got to say about Angelico. We kind of strayed off there towards the end about just kind of talking about Lucha Underground as a promotion, and it's
Worth
worth
it.
it because it's
Worth
so
it.
good. But that being said, I think one person I want to make sure I want to look just to really be sure, but one person I believe got the next spotlight correct, and it was wrestling fan underscore LC. He knew it was the crew. The crew is next. So next we're going to be talking about what happened in season 1 for Mr. Cisco, Cortez Castro, and Vale, and what's going to happen in season 2 for Mr. Cisco and Cortez Castro, because obviously Bale got his face eaten off.
He has no face.
Or life.
Sounds good, man.
That being said, we will see everyone on Saturday for our spotlight on the crew.